Good evening again, everyone. Welcome. My name is Reverend Marietta Macy. I serve as one of our current co-moderators of the Palestine Justice Network of the Presbyterian Church USA, who is your host for this evening's event. So on behalf of our network, welcome to this event. Welcome to this lovely Presbyterian church that is hosting us here. Many of us are gathered for our annual network meetings. We've been here for the last couple of days and have traveled here from all over the country. So thank you all local folks for welcoming us and for this being such a lovely place to visit. We appreciate the hospitality so far. On behalf of our network, again, welcome. We are an official mission network of the denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA. We are not an official entity. We are not staff people of our denomination. And in that capacity, we get to do events like this, where we get to push a little bit farther than where the status quo is saying we should be, and then often where a lot of our churches and friends and siblings in the pews are. But it is where we hope and prophetically believe that we all should be headed. So we're glad that you can be a part of this event tonight. We hope that you will stay in touch with us, become involved in our work. We do all kinds of things. You can find more information on our website, our Instagram page especially, thanks to our wonderful communications person, Mina, for keeping that up. We do trips to Palestine to support Palestinians in multiple ways, multiple witness and solidarity trips. We provide educational resources. We do a lot of advocacy around our denomination's policies, advocating for divestment, for example, from HP, Caterpillar, and Motorola Solutions, among others, advocating for boycotts, all kinds of economic actions that can hopefully make an actual difference. So if you're interested in supporting that or getting to know us better, welcome, and welcome to our event. I'm going to introduce one of our steering committee members, Dee Roberts, who's going to introduce our speakers.
So excited to be here with you all this evening. My name is Dee Roberts. I am part of the steering committee, as Marietta said. I am also a librarian, so this is particularly exciting for me. So I am so excited to welcome our two speakers this evening. First, we have Hannah Mashabek, who is a second-generation Palestinian-American author and book worker who was raised in a family of publishers and booksellers and learned the power of literature at a young age. Hannah has worked in publishing for over a decade at companies such as Chronicle Books, the Quarto Group, and Simon & Schuster. She now runs Interlink Publishing, the only Palestinian-owned publishing house in the United States, alongside her family. Her debut picture book, Homeland, My Father Dreams of Palestine, won the New England Book Award and the Arab American Book Award. She lives in Amherst, Massachusetts, on the homelands of the Pocumtuck and Nipmuc nations. Second, we have Sim Kern, who is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of Genocide Bad and the Free People's Village. As a journalist, Sim has investigated petrochemical polluters and exposed malfeasance amid the state takeover of public schools in Houston, Texas. Sim is also a book influencer and activist who created the Trans Rights Readathon in 2002, which raised over $250,000 for trans-supporting organizations in its first year alone. Since October 7th, 2023, Sim has shared educational content about Palestine and mobilized their followers to raise more than $500,000 in direct aid for families in Gaza. So I invite our two lovely speakers to join me up here this evening. So please, round of applause. and we'll just dive in. Sound good? Okay, so Hannah, I'm going to start with you. And so in the foreword of Genocide Bad, Sim mentions that Interlink Press was the one who commissioned this book. I'm wondering if you can share with us how you all came to that decision, what the process was like, and why this book at this time.
Sure. Well, I have to say that, I've been in the publishing industry for a long time, and I was aware of Sim already from taking part in the Trans Rights Readathon. And with any activist, as a Palestinian American, I always wonder, are they an activist except for Palestine? And so when October 7th happened and Sim's video encouraging people to read books by Palestinians went viral, I was like, oh, phew. I don't have to write that one off. And so I started getting really curious about them. And, I've been working in this movement and in publishing for a really long time. And I've read probably every book on the topic, certainly every nonfiction book on the topic. And I can tell you, especially when I was younger, reading some of those books was like really dense. It was like 100 Years' War on Palestine is not a quick and easy read, to say the least. And I think that actually ends up becoming a roadblock for a lot of people, particularly when the very common Zionist argument is, oh, it's too complicated, you could never possibly understand. So I realized what Sim was doing in their videos is they were taking these big historical events and they were breaking them down not only in an accessible way but in quite a funny way as well, and using internet talk and appealing kind of to a new generation. And so I observed them for a while, and I realized that a lot of these educational videos were done so well that I felt I wanted them to reach people who weren't on TikTok, which I know is a lot of people. So I reached out to them and I asked them if they would be interested in writing this book.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Sim, a large section of Genocide Bad is focused on how to respond to Israeli Hezbollah, the incredibly well-funded propaganda machine that Israel supports in order to spread disinformation. Towards the end of the book, on page 165, you mention the rabbit hole of misinformation. In this moment, when Israel is ramping up its propaganda, including specifically targeting certain Christian churches with a campaign of lies spread through AI-generated content on social media, which is causing even more confusion than normal, what are some strategies or ways, tools people can use to try and recognize this sea of misinformation that they're swimming in?
Yeah, AI is making everything on the internet really weird, really fast. And so one thing actually we were talking about earlier today, the one thing that can be trusted more than ever is person-to-person communication. And so even though I do, for the moment, have this large following, it's increasingly getting hard for me to get any views because these corporations are getting better and better at cracking down on discussion of Gaza and Palestine. The algorithms are getting better at, sort of sniffing out our tricks. And those of us who've been doing it for a while and are known for this, our accounts get flagged and our videos just don't get shown to people anymore. So I've enjoyed a brief 2-year window in time to be able to speak to a large audience. But it does seem like the internet is becoming it's getting harder and harder to have these conversations online. And I think the spread of AI-generated content is really going to damage everybody's faith in anything they see online, which is why it's so important to keep having these conversations in other formats, which is why I'm really glad you made me write a book, because that is something that will be on shelves in libraries, in schools, it's in universities. It can't just be deleted by a corporation in a second. It's a physical object that matters. Things like we may see a pendulum swing towards analog forms of communication, just zines, talking to people, talking to your communities, talking to your family members. So yeah, I don't have a good solution to how to fight the rise of AI. I'm sort of I feel like any day now I'm going to see an AI generated video of myself doing something or saying something I would never do, because that technology is now just so completely accessible. So I don't know, it's getting weird. It's getting weird out there.
That's an understatement. Yeah, so I think that on the topic of physical books and physical media, I'm in my physical media era right now. And I think that all three of us up here can probably share an overabundance of censorship experiences as it relates to Palestine. And so for my part, as a librarian who's been on the front edges of trying to provide accurate information on Palestine in the university ecosystem, it's it's frustrating, oftentimes rage-inducing, and within librarianships there's this concept of neutrality, and so while a valiant and important undertaking, this quest for neutrality and maintaining a semblance of neutrality often comes at the cost of ethical and moral considerations regarding information to access itself. From my vantage point, access to information has never been a topic of neutrality, but rather an issue that is deeply steeped in ethical considerations and then the violation of those same ethics. So in the context of Palestine, libraries have a really long way to go in order to achieve somewhat of a true intellectual freedom on the topic of Palestine. So Hannah, very recently, you experienced with your children's book, Homeland, it being banned within the entire North Carolina State Library system because it violated their neutrality policy. So on that, can you talk to us a bit about what that experience was like, and then also the dangers of this kind of both sides-ism when it comes to stories around Palestine?
Yeah, it was surreal, to be honest, because I was invited during Banned Books Week to speak about censorship and book banning, and then was told, 2 days before I was set to give my lecture, that I could talk about whatever I wanted to, but I wasn't allowed to read my children's book. Now keep in mind, my picture book is for 5 to 8-year-olds, so there's nothing that should affect in any way 18 plus critical thinkers. And this was a big mistake on the university's part, and they even admitted that later. They were like, we should have gone for your character, It's true. But what was really fascinating about it is that, I was invited to talk about censorship, and so it gave me the perfect material to give my lecture on. So I asked them to provide information about which policy I violated, and it was part of their policy that's stated intention was to protect people of all lived identities, of diverse backgrounds. And they added a little clause that said anyone invited by the university to speak could not speak about anything that was considered politically controversial of the time. And that is everything about my identity. I am a fat, queer Palestinian American who wrote a banned book. And so what I was able to do is I was able to look into the history of this policy, right? Because this was a new policy that had been instituted, interestingly, around the time that Trump had been elected, and was actually an overhaul of their DEI practices. So what basically meant it was the first time they were putting this into effect. They were weaponizing these policies for the sake of neutrality and protecting people of diverse backgrounds, and they were weaponizing it against certain people. And what I thought was really useful about that is that students had no idea. They had no idea that the policy had changed. There was no announcement made about that. They only learned about it when I pointed it out in my lecture. Now, I write books for children, so when I go to university, it's I'm not a hot commodity. My fans are usually 3 to 8-year-olds. So this event would have happened without very many attendees, without much controversy. But when they told me I couldn't read my children's book, automatically student groups and the student media, particularly the Black student newspaper, decided to write a story about it, and that's when things started really escalating. The university admin sent people to my hotel to try to strong-arm me, to convince me that, of course they couldn't let me read my children's book. It had, and I quote, the P word in the title. Yes. It was a wild experience, and they also, unfortunately, admin, I found out later, had forced the head of library services to really take the fall for this, to say that it was his decision, in fact, to require me not to read my book, which after interrogating him for 5 seconds was so clear that he was deeply ashamed of the actions that he had to do. And so after giving this lecture, I decided, what are they going to do to me if I read my book? Turns out nothing. Yeah, thank you. I was set to speak at a park, and they intentionally invited me to read my book for the local community, for students at a park the next day, and they changed the event from being story time with Hannah Mushabek to celebrating reading event. Very neutral, right? Super neutral.
Yeah.
And I decided to completely ignore their requests, and I went ahead and I read my book, and I watched as campus security circled the park. And I think I realized at one point that, I coordinated with student groups, and we had a whole plan that if they detained me, someone else would pop up and continue reading my book, right? Yes, amazing. And I sat there on the stage, and children had sort of clustered around me. One sat right next to me and held onto my skirt, sort of unknowing what was happening. And I watched as these campus police went and took orders from this main admin person, and I think they just were the optics would be bad if we did this. But I'm so grateful because the student groups rallied, the ACLU got involved, PEN America, which I'm currently boycotting for their atrocious lack of action on Palestinian censorship, also wrote a statement. And the next week after I left the event, the student government voted in the Mushabek Freedom to Read Act. Which I'm maybe more proud about than anything ever. So, I speak about this because we have seen this rise in censorship and book bans, and it's terrible. And I think that we assume because I didn't win, right, because the university did not acknowledge their faults and apologize to me, that it was somehow a failure. But I actually think that these instances, the hubbub that we make around these instances are sometimes more important than even allowing me to read my book. Every single event that I do these days, if it's affiliated with a university or with an elementary school, cause such chaos that people within those communities have to educate themselves about Palestine. They have to decide exactly where they stand. They have to basically do a book report on my book and search for it. And the only evidence that they can come up with against my book is that it is written by a Palestinian American, which in itself showcases the injustice that Palestinians are facing all over the country merely because of their existence. So I encourage you, whenever you can, invite Palestinians to your schools, introduce Palestinian books at your book club, because the chaos that will ensue after that is in fact the work that we need to be doing.
I just want to add on to just this concept of neutrality.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as neutrality. And I come at this from a journalism place. I call all journalism propaganda. Everything is propaganda. Every piece of written media, everything you say is propaganda. And I get a lot of pushback on this online, and I get into debates with people. And they're like, no, again, what is neutrality? It's showing both sides. Often what we think of neutrality or neutral reporting is siding with the oppressor, siding with a status quo that is violent, using a type of rhetoric that has deep colonial roots. impassionate sort of rhetorical standards of how traditional media reports on things in this country. The way we dehumanize, the way we try to strip all emotion, even when we're talking about horrifying atrocities, and we're expected to report on it with no emotion, with no stake in the game, without expressing our disgust at what's happening. This is part of mass normalization of horrific violence, and it only serves the people doing the atrocities. It serves the status quo. So I don't believe in neutrality. I think neutrality is always a weapon of the oppressor. Take a side.
I'm glad you went there, because I was going to ask you to go there.
Okay.
Yeah. So kind of on this language not being neutral, right? I've gotten flack. I know you have gotten a lot of flack online for this decision, but in Genocide Bad and in a lot of your videos on social media, you have talked about your decision and your movement from stopping using the term anti-Semitism to explain what happens and moving towards anti-Jewish hate, which as a Christian queer person, that is something I have been doing for a long time. And I want you to explain from your social location as an anti-Zionist Jew, how do you distinguish between the two, and why are you discarding that problematic A word?
Yeah, so the main reason that I have stopped using anti-Semitism is that other Semitic peoples feel erased by it. So the term Semite is a racial term that was coined by 17th century German racists who were defining what are the races of Earth. And this guy Johann Gaderer in Germany decided that, oh, those people in the Middle East are descended from Shem, one of Noah's sons, and we here in Europe are descended from Japheth, and we're superior. He just decided that too. And we're different races. And just based on that was just an idea he had, and he wrote it down, and then this became a framework in which people understood different races. It didn't end up becoming the dominant racial hierarchy that we use. That was Carl Linnaeus decided that based on the humors in people's bodies, they were either yellow, red, white, or black, based on whether they had, I don't know if you know the Galenic, this is an ancient Greek idea that the body was made up of 4 humors: blood, red, black bile, black, yellow bile, which was yellow, and then phlegm, which was white.
Yep.
That's where our idea of those 4 races come from, was that the idea was like white people had more phlegm, and that's why they're white. And he also had a 5th racial category, which was the monstruoso, which was the monsters, which included elves, werewolves. This is where we get our racial ideas from. So anyways, this is the kind of mind that came up with the term Semite. So I'm like, why are we still using this? And then around October 7th, when obviously the word was getting thrown around a lot, there were a lot of Palestinian Arab people saying, we feel erased by this term anti-Semitism, because despite its origins, they've come to think of themselves as Semitic people. This has become a category of people. And Semitic languages are a language family that there is some legitimacy to the fact that Hebrew and Arabic share roots, along with many other languages spoken across the Middle East and North Africa. And I took that seriously. Here's the people facing genocide, and this term anti-Semitism is used to only refer to the people committing the genocide, not the victims of it. And then I looked, but then other anti-Zionist Jews were arguing this online and saying, but that term has always been used to mean anti-Jewish, so that's why we're going to keep using it that way. And I thought, well, we can change the way we use language all the time, but I went to look into that history. Well, the term anti-Semite was the name of a political party in Germany that became the Nazi Party. Wilhelm Marr was Hitler's idol. He was the forerunner of Hitler, and he founded the Party of Anti-Semitism in Germany, which had a stated political goal of removing all the Jews from Germany. That was their campaign. That was their platform. Their policy platform was getting the Jews out of Germany. They were the party of anti-Semites. There were people all over Europe sympathetic to them. Arthur Balfour in England was one who famously did the Balfour Declaration to get the Jews out of the UK. He said, we're going to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So it was a political term. It was just targeting Jews originally in Germany. But why are we still using it? And you know who had the same political goals as the party of anti-Semites? Were the Zionists. And they worked together. The early Zionists were saying, there's a great Karl Kraus book, quote that I have in the book, where this was an anti-Zionist Jewish writer at the time who was saying, the anti-Semites cry, out with you Jews. And the Zionists echo, yes, out with us Jews. Only their tone is slightly different. And so why are we still using I don't like this word. I don't like this word. And then I just got sick of hearing it because it's used in such bad faith. And Israel has conflated it so completely with just any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. That has nothing to do with me. That, as an anti-Zionist Jew, this word doesn't have anything to do with me. It doesn't serve me. And I think anti-Jewish hate, I like because it's modular. We can get rid of all these words that have phobia at the end. Some of them are phobias. Some of them are isms. I don't like that. It's not parallel. Also, there are people diagnosed with phobias who are not a big fan of how Islamophobia isn't fear. It's not a phobia of Muslims. So anti-Jewish hate, and then you can plug in anything. Anti-queer hate, anti-Palestinian hate. Hate is a phenomenon that we should study a little more clearly. And saying anti-Semitism, it's like carving out, this is this one special kind of hate that's different from all the others, and I don't like the term, so I stopped using it. I got sick of hearing it.
Yeah, rightfully so. So, on speaking, so for those that haven't been with us for the last couple of days, the major theme for our PJN annual meeting this year has been Speak Now, emphasizing the importance of people to continue to speak out about Palestine because this ceasefire deal is a farce and not a reality. There is no ceasefire. And so both of you have risked your safety, your comfort, your financial security to be unapologetically loud in your activism around Palestine. And I'd like for both of you to talk about what motivates you, what makes you get up, continue day in, day out, especially over the last 2+ years, what continues to make you get out of bed every morning and choose this unapologetically loud stance on Palestine?
I feel like sometimes I have a really inspiring, hopeful, rousing idea, and sometimes I'm very honest that a lot of days I don't want to get out of bed. That I think every single Palestinian I know, and anyone, honestly, within our orbits, have been affected by unimaginable violence that we never, ever could comprehend. My therapist likes to say that with intergenerational trauma, your body doesn't know the difference between what is happening to the people in Palestine and what is happening to you now. And the Nakba was so violent that it echoed through the generations that even I feel so affected by it generations later, and we recognize that this violence is 1,000 times worse than the Nakba. That being said, I'm not an idiot. I understand the connections between our liberation struggles. And I know that what's happening to Palestine, to Palestinians, not only am I selfish because they're my friends and they're my loved ones and I care about them, but I also know that there will be ricochets if we allow genocide to take place with our tax dollars, with our consent, there will be ricochets, and we see this happening even now with IDF, experimented weapons that are being used against non-citizens in this country, soon to be citizens in this country. I know that, oppression only grows, and that we've seen colonial settler violence ricochet throughout the world. And so ultimately, it is not some moral compass that I am a better person and I believe in doing the right thing. It's because I'm scared. I'm scared of even more carnage. I'm scared of even more affected people. I'm scared of losing more people. And I see the threads. I see it escalating. And so I think, when I talk to people, I try to, it's very hard as an American who's always been fairly safe, to even comprehend that this might affect us. We've been conditioned to think oh, it's over there, it's those people, they're so different from us. But really, they're not. This is something that is being fueled and funded by our government, and there is money being made. And when you prioritize profit over life, it is a very slippery slope. So, gosh, I don't know if that was very hopeful or inspiring or not, but that's certainly the reason that I do what I do.
It was honest. That's all we can ask.
It's a lot of different things on different days, which is why I feel like my content sometimes can be all over the place tonally. Sometimes I'm sort of flippant about this morning in the workshop. I said, sometimes when all other wells of motivation fail, spite is a very deep well to draw upon. And the fact that I am Jewish and I've gotten death threats from so many people in my own community, that digs me, nothing digs me in like that kind of garbage, I also hate inconsistencies and fallacies and lies, and I find those things very motivating. But of course, the longer you do this work, one thing I say at the end of the book, which is funny, we got pushback on recently from a translator, but was, or a press in another country, was that at the very end of the book, I say, organize for Palestine because it's cool. Do it because it's a trend. Do it because you look great in a keffiyeh. I don't care. And I think that's really important. I think we get hung up on intention over action, and I don't give a fuck about anybody's intentions. The church, I'm going to try not to swear, but I don't care about anyone's intentions. I care, what are you doing? And some days I'm doing it because I need to get my views up. And some days it's because I'm in total despair, and some days it's because I saw something that ticked me off, and I feel like I need to say something about it, And I think over time, your intentions do get deeper the more you do the work. When I started in October 7th, this was largely an academic thing to me. I was motivated to speak out on Palestine because of personal beefs I had with people in my family and because of books I had read. I didn't have any close Palestinian friends then. I had never been in a Palestinian home. I didn't know a single person living in Palestine. And now, over the past 2 years, that's completely transformed. It's so much more deeply personal now. Now I count Hannah as one of my dear friends, and I've been welcomed into multiple of your family homes. I know dozens of people in Gaza. And so it's just so much deeper on a personal level. And so I think that whatever little motivation that you have, don't worry about if your motivation is pure enough or whatever. I guess that wasn't really the question, but I think over time it's okay if lots of different things motivate you. It's okay if people come to activism from a self-serving or even performative place. It's fine to perform as long as you're performing for a good cause. Performance is a really important part of activism. So yeah, I think whatever can bring you to the struggle. And then I think one reason I've locked in so much on Palestine, because I was a climate activist for 20 years. And I think and obviously it's just sort of the whim of the algorithm. I never blew up for talking about climate, but because I'm Jewish, I blew up for talking about this issue. You know, I had a video that got 20 million views, and like, in a way, like you said, all our struggles are connected. Find the piece of empire where you can have an impact. Find the issue. You know, if you're defending your community against ICE, you're also supporting Palestine. If you're fighting against censorship of books, you're also supporting Palestine. Like, I'm just saying, there's so many different ways to get involved. If you're fighting for climate justice and earth justice, that's fighting for Palestine, because climate change is going to make Palestine uninhabitable. So that's another thing, is like, find a good way to stay motivated is to be effective. And to be effective, you have to figure out who your audience is, figure out how you can use your identity and skill set to make a big impact, or a small impact, whatever impact you can make. So,
Yeah, there is a Palestinian Christian theologian, Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb, who recently has been talking about the software and the hardware of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. The hardware being the military weapons and the bombs and the endless support of arms to the Zionist entity, and the software is the like narrative cover, specifically like in Mitri's case, the theological narrative that we are constructing. And so recently, when asked, you know, by people, Mitri, what do you do? He's like, I am a virus. I am a software virus that is here to crack the systems of empire. And so I think that you were talking about spite. And I think for me, I'm like, yes, I can buy onto that. I am a virus. And so that's sort of how I've come to think of myself in the last couple of weeks. But
also, you know, there was something like so abjectly horrifying, the idea that like I would be sitting amongst an entire community that could see a genocide unfolding in like real-time 4K HD and not care. I think that was so horrifying, and I think that's so horrifying to people who do finally sort of awaken to what's happening. They look around them, and that's kind of like it doesn't get worse than genocide, you know? Like, if we can watch and not lift a finger to stop a genocide, then there is no worse than that, you know?
and there's no red line.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we have plenty of time for questions from you all. We have two people who will be bringing mics so that our audience online will be able to hear us. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand and wait for one of our runners to bring you a mic. We got one over here.
Hello, I just want to say thank you for being in Madison. I think being in a university campus town, it's really integral that you're here, and I love how many people are here. I wish there were more people too. So my question might be kind of getting ahead of things, but what's next? What do we do next as AI gets further ingrained and, you know, puts up the censorship piece? What other conversations do we have? Like, it just seems like if you can't understand or get behind getting rid of this genocide, then I don't know how else to convince you that these things are wrong.
Well, I think that I should say that there have been so many incredible activists who have been doing this work for a really long time, and you do not have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to get on board. You know, there are so many different campaigns that are currently going on in this country. There's apartheid-free communities, there's the divestment campaigns, there's BDS campaigns. All of these are tiny little levers, and we know that we need such, you know, any true act of resistance, any true revolution comes from 1,000 different directions at the same time. And so, you know, Sim and I have been talking a lot today about influencing your sphere. And if you can no longer influence your sphere online, because they might take that capability away from us, it doesn't stop you from influencing your sphere in your community, you know, and we are finding, especially, you know, since Trump was elected, that we do need to create community networks. You know, I'm part of a group chat that has ICE alerts so that there can be, you know, comrades sent to support non-citizens, and that is something that, you know, came out of community grassroots building, and so there's a million ways that we can get involved in that way. I think that also bolstering and supporting and amplifying the voices of the people who have been doing this for so long is really, really important. And then also I think visibility, you know. I was so tickled because a couple years ago we created lawn signs. You know, I live in an incredibly white community that has probably 15 times more Black Lives Matter signs than Black people. So I was like, well, why can't we get some free Palestine signs up in here? And I created a lawn sign and we started selling them online. And I saw one like 2 blocks from this church here, which is just incredible to think of like how the message has spread. It's, I mean, yay for the person who put it in front of their house. I think that visibility, it's still incredibly dangerous to support Palestine. I mean, there are repercussions of physical violence, of job loss, but every person who stands up and even just talks about Palestine, you know, even says the P word, you know, makes it a little bit safer for others to do so. So, you know, we might have to take this fight analog, but I honestly think that that's all the more strength to us.
And I think we're creative. I mean, I think we'll find ways to pivot. There will be pendulum swings, you know, in any political struggle. And we've found a way to subvert censorship before. We've jumped platforms before. I mean, I've lived long enough to remember MySpace. Like, you know, there's a Palestinian-owned Instagram clone called Upscrolled that I'm really trying to make happen.
You really
so
are.
I'll go
I
over to
love it.
Upscrolled.
There's like
they're
me
not
and you
paying
and
me.
10 people.
Yeah, they're not paying. There's thousands.
All right,
There's
thousands.
thousands. But just thousands, probably. You know, I think you and I have to remind each other constantly. I remind myself daily that so much of activism is you don't have to reinvent the wheel every day. You don't have to think of new ideas every day. It's just saying the same clear messages over and over and over again, because you never know who you're going to reach that day. And some people need to hear it 30 times or every day for 30 years before they start to change their mind. My mother didn't speak to me for 4 years. Started watching my videos, then, you know, called me a terrorist, cut me off. She's a Christian Zionist. Cut me off. Didn't speak to me for 4 years, didn't see her grandkids for 4 years. Now she's moving to Houston, in part because she started watching my videos and she started thinking, you know what's happening to those Palestinians is really terrible. So like that's one person, but like if I hadn't ever influenced anybody, I got through to one person, you know? And man, I just did a video that got tanked because of censorship. I thought it was pretty good. But you know, I've been doing this thing, I keep checking back in on like a series where since the election of Donald Trump, I said, if you don't like what happened with this election, you have 4 options. You can maintain the status quo, just keep living your life and expect somebody else to fix it. You can work to try to fix the Democratic Party from within so that they'll be more electable next time, maybe. You can try to build third-party power, challenge the Democrats, or you can build power outside the state. And I said, get involved with one of those things. Well, where we're at a year from that is like a lot of those strategies have been worked. You have people like Zoran Mamdani. You have 36 Democratic candidates right now are running, campaigning on the fact that they're not taking money from AIPAC. That's their campaign centerpiece. That's unthinkable 5 years ago. Unthinkable. 36 Democrats. So there are people trying to reform the party from within. But and there's people trying to build third-party power. I see Zoran is a DSA. So the DSA is sort of a combination of building a third party and running from within. And then there's a ton of mutual aid stuff happening, building power outside the state. Mutual aid networks, all this ICE defense, community defense against ICE, that's building power outside the state. That's a direct challenge to state power. So there's a lot of people doing this stuff. But the vast, vast majority of liberals unhappy with Donald Trump's election are doing number one. They're doing nothing, which is team maintain the status quo, which is expect somebody else to fix it. So it's not like those other three strategies are flawed and we have to think of some brilliant new revolutionary plan. If enough people just did those first three things, we'd be great. But most people, we're not reaching them. So we just got to keep trying to talk to them.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think it's what next, like trying to cultivate moments of joy, I think is like really important in this work and to maintain longevity. And a moment for joy for me right now is that speaking of people who are running within the Democratic Party to try and make things better, Representative Ruha Roman from Georgia is running for governor of Georgia, first Muslim American woman, Palestinian, to be elected to the Georgia House, and now is running for governor. And so, like, it might not be perfect or fix everything, but it is something. And I know that there are dozens of other local candidates that are running that are Palestinian and trying to make things better. So I would just offer to keep an eye on those people. And then I really think for all of us who are not students, showing up for the students. Like, that's what's constantly next for me. I think that, I mean, I work in a university setting, and so I'm already integrated, but for those of you that are not, I really think that showing up for the students as they do their work, especially in the resulting kind of universal squashing of all in the encampments of 2024 in very violent, state-supported violent ways. I really think that now the wind has kind of been a little bit knocked out of student sails because of the violence and the lack of safety. And so I really would encourage anybody who does have a university campus or some sort of institution of education close by to be there, to be bodies on the ground, regardless of whether or not that university campus will allow you to be there. I would just say be there for the students. I think that's one really concrete, clear path forward for those of us that are no longer students. Any other questions? Okay, we've got one here in the front, and we'll go over there.
Do I have to stand up? Hi, thanks for being here. My question, I'm going to tell you right away, my question is about the landscape of information. And so, like Sim, I saw you on Instagram right after October 7th, and I was just like, this is awesome. Somebody's speaking out, and people are listening, and then just seeing the explosion of citizen journalists in Gaza and people just reacting to the situation and talking off the top of their head. And so I want to hear from you just about that shift in how we share information and the accessibility of it and the impact of it, and also, as you said, like the fact that that can all be taken away so easily when it's social media. And then in the publishing world, because I'm also an author, is I've seen the way the narrative has opened up through what's happened, not only in the mainstream media, but also in the publishing industry. And I just want to hear from you about, in your view, how that's changing. And as things open up and change, there's also a lot of pushback, which we've touched on. But if you could just talk about that a little bit more, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
I think anytime I need hope or someone asks me to talk about hope, a really easy well for me to draw on is to think about how much more information, how much more educated people are about Palestine today than God in 2021. Sorry, I took the Lord's name in vain. Hashem. In Judaism, we say Hashem because it's like a nickname for God. So you're not allowed to say God in Hebrew, but you can say Hashem. It's like his nickname. It's like, so you can say that. What was the question? Oh yeah, media, information landscape. So the information, when I got my Canary mission profile in 2021, when I founded a local chapter of Houston Jewish Voice for Peace. I got a Canary Mission profile because I tried to do a readathon for Palestine. This was during the Sheikh Jarrah evictions of Mohammed El-Kurd's family, a wonderful journalist and author, if you aren't familiar with him. And it was a ramp up to, I think, Operation Guardian of the Walls, it was called. It was a massacre. And during that time, I created a Read for Palestine challenge on YouTube, and I got 2 other YouTubers to do it with me, and we had a final video, and I think like 600 people watched the video, and that was it. And because of that, because it was just like read books by Palestinian authors for 1 week, I got a profile on Canary Mission where I was being like blasted by this. Canary Mission, if you're not familiar, is this database run by Zionists where they make profiles of people who are like pro-Palestine. If they can figure out your address, they'll dox you, which luckily I've had good digital security, so they weren't able to figure that out. But they actually put a picture of my kids up originally, and Palestine Legal helped me they threatened them, and they got the pictures taken down. But from then on, when you search my name, Sim Kern, one of the first search links you'll see is my Canary Mission profile, which the first sentence is, Sim has spread hatred of Israel in America. And I'm like, yes! Yes! This is so cool! So much street cred. But when I talk about like being motivated by spite, like that was because I told you to read books, you're trying to dox me? Like, what is this? And that was then, and then I think about, back then, trying to get people to care about Palestine, it was like I could get 2 other YouTubers to care about it. Now, everyone's talking about it. It's in the conversation. And even people who aren't really that invested know what the Nakba is. Like, they've heard of that. They know the occupation. They know that the West Bank and Gaza are different places. They know that Gaza is surrounded on 3 sides by a wall and the other by the sea. And actually, though, you would be surprised how many people still don't know that. Like still don't know that people in Gaza can't just leave. That when we talk about having to repeat very basic information over and over again, but millions more people have learned these things. They've learned so much over the last 2 years. Not enough. We got to keep educating. We got to keep talking about it. But that's been a huge change, and we do just need to keep teaching, keep spreading this information, pivoting to new platforms and new and old ways of sharing information. Like the book has been so powerful. Because I on social media, you're mostly talking to young people, but with the book, I get emails like every day from someone who's like, I found your book in my bookstore, and it's like, a person who's not on TikTok telling me, that they found my book and that it really meant a lot to them. So, just keep sharing the information.
So for publishing, I like to think I'm like the OG Nepo baby because I was born, except without the wealth and the privilege, I was born 13 days after my parents established Interlink Publishing. And they really did because, my father had been made refugee 2 times over, first from Palestine and then from Lebanon in the Lebanese Civil War, and he met my English mother and they ended up in New York. And as someone who grew up in this like very literary Palestinian family, he was really appalled by the fact that Americans didn't even have access to our literature. And our literature is like centuries old. Like we invented universities, like we invented the library, like, no shade to anyone else, but like it's kind of, Arabs. But, so he was shocked that like the only depictions of Arabs that Americans had access to in the 1970s was like violent news headlines and like the villains in the Indiana Jones movies. And he really believed, he always likes to wax poetic and say that like, he's like, Habibti, like a people's soul is through their literature. And so he really felt that if he could bring literature from the Middle East, translate it to English and share it, that these atrocities committed against Palestinians, this anti-Palestinian hate that he witnessed every day, couldn't possibly continue because people would see that we were human. So Interlink has just like the most incredible catalog. We have over 1,500 books in our 38-year publishing lineage. We have the last ever book that Mahmoud Darwish wrote. We have the English translation. We have early Ghassan Kanafani fiction. We have this incredible list, and my family expanded. They started. They actually started as like it was called Media Link. They would bring newspapers. They were flight attendants. That was their day job. They were flight attendants. So like in the morning, they would be in Jordan, and then they would buy all the newspapers from like a newspaper stand, and then they would fly back to New York, and then by the next day, they would sell them to all the bodegas, and that was kind of like how it all started. Not entirely legally, and there was like no exports being made on these. But once Interlink started to grow, they started publishing books that really just celebrated cultures from the global south. Cookbooks, children's books, nonfiction, fiction. We have an incredible literature and translation. And it has always been done pretty much with the same philosophy of like, I got books in my car, like, let's hit the bodega. Like, independent publishing is notoriously difficult. And all of these publishing institutions, the conferences, the trade publications, even, library systems, all systematically exclude Palestine. Overdrive, the biggest technology site, has Zionist owners, and they don't categorize Palestine in their, inventory system. So, we were being erased in all of these ways, and it was really just through, selling books out of the back of the car, grassroots, that we've been able to survive and continue to survive by a thread. We've seen a little bit of change in publishing, where there is national attention. Corporate publishers will always see the potential for profit. And so the last publisher that I worked on, published Hala Alian's memoir, Susan Abu Hawa's novel, and Benjamin Netanyahu's autobiography. It was a weird place to work. So, we've seen a little bit, but as with evidenced in Sim's book, this book was a New York Times bestseller straight out the gate, sort of broke all of these incredible records. We had a $0 marketing budget. It was such a grassroots campaign. There were so many people involved in pre-ordering this book to try to see if we could get it in the New York Times, and yet there was zero coverage in any of the trades. Sim even met up with a journalist who interviewed them for 2 hours, being like, we're going to do this incredible story on the fact that this book, tiny independent press, just blew other book sales out of the water, and then it got killed.
It got killed, yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen this happen time and time again.
But I will say, that was Publishers Weekly. They killed the story on the book in April, but they just named the book one of Publishers Weekly's best books of 2025.
It's true.
So maybe things are changing a little bit.
There's someone in there.
There's people fighting. Someone's fighting for it.
It's always been a challenge, and we've started to see these incremental shifts, and I think that those are always wins, that they're always worth celebrating. But I also think that, publishing is incredibly thin margins. If you look at any other industry, people will make so much more on products, and publishing, it thrives and survives on underpaying overeducated people. And unfortunately, so the best way that you can support books, Palestinian books, progressive books, leftist books, is as a consumer, and it is buying them, supporting them, or just requesting them from your library, which makes a huge, huge impact. So if you're not already, I encourage everyone to do that.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say the best thing that can help independent booksellers is to request it through your public library. And if you have a problem with your library ordering the book, there's an organization I'm part of, Librarians and Archivists with Palestine, not for, like the book says. But It's
Oh,
okay.
We have a typo.
It's
sorry.
okay. It's okay. Librarians and Archivists with Palestine, we do a lot of like grassroots work behind the scenes. So if your public library gives you a hard time, as one of the many people in that network, please shoot us an email, and we would love to know about it. Because we are doing a censorship tracker right now where we're tracking where things are being censored and collecting all of that data, and that would be considered censorship, so please let us know. There was a question over here and then one in the back.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm a little starstruck because I've been following on Instagram for years, and I didn't know it was your yard sign as well, so really exciting.
Are you the owner of the lawn sign?
Oh, they're all over the city, I think.
Really?
We have it in our window. So my question, going back to some of the earlier things you said, you talked about the history of the way the anti-Semitism, the way it was designed to get Jews out of Europe, and Zionism is trying to remove Palestinians out of Palestine, and it's the same language and parallels of Trump and white nationalists trying to remove brown people out of the US, the main target being Hispanics. And I was curious if you saw patterns between this like human, not like binary version of humanity, like you deserve to be here, you don't deserve to be here, you're human, you're not human, citizen, non-citizen. Like we're all here, and they're just abducting passport holders, visa holders. Like it doesn't matter if you're a citizen or not, you're just brown. And so I was curious, like seeing these parallels, it seems like a big part of the weaponry is narrative. And the narrative is like allowing people to put these glasses on their heads and just look away or let it happen or support it. And so I was curious if you could talk a little bit about, you talked about repetition and keeping a simple message, but if you could share strategies and ways that were really effective for you in helping people make that connection between like humanity and like seeing people as human despite what you've been indoctrinated to think, and ways that we can connect that Palestinian liberation with seeing humanity of everybody, and especially as it's happening in our own home right here. So yeah, just like what worked, breaking through those like Hasbro glasses or white national, like citizen, non-citizen binary glasses. What can we do here today and for Palestine together? Thank you.
I think one thing that's really tough about that, why we're so resistant to it, is capitalism is completely based on dehumanizing some people. Our whole way of life, our whole economics, the moral logic of our universes, the overwhelming messages that we get from media, starting with children's media, is that there's good and bad people, and that, I have young children, so I watch a lot of children's movies, and so many of them are like propaganda, and it's like, there are bad guys, get the bad guys and put them in jail. Sometimes at the end of the movie, often in Disney movies, die a violent death. It's so, our thinking is so carceral, and we blame people for their suffering, which there are some theological roots to that we all need to unpack regardless of our faith traditions. So I think doing that deconstruct, I think first of all, like those of us that already are activists and stuff, have to work constantly on that kind of deconstruction and like resisting those narratives wherever they come up, and really thinking deeply about things like abolition, right? And hierarchy and all the ways in which we categorize people as more and less human and accept the suffering of some over others as more or less human. But then how do you talk to someone who's like, if you've done a lot of that work yourself and you're at a place where you're like, everyone should have human rights, people aren't responsible for their poverty or criminality, how do you talk to that person that is not on the same wavelength? I think, you mentioned it in your question, but like very specific narratives that challenge the dominant propaganda can be really helpful. So for example, my my mother used the term illegals in front of me on her most recent visit. And if I had said, quoted something Rachel Maddow said on her show, or if I had talked in abstraction, we would have just fought. But I said, Mom, my best friend was here on a green card legally for 10 years. She came here as an 8-year-old kid, and I told the story about my friend was pregnant, and I had to go while she was 9 months pregnant to their naturalization hearing with their spouse and their lawyer to film in case they were taken in by ICE. And this was the week that Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeysa Ozturk had been abducted. And I was there to film in case they were abducted by ICE, but nothing happened. And after they came out and they had been approved for citizenship, the relief was so intense that we were at breakfast celebrating, and they immediately went into labor and had their baby that night. So I had a personal story, and my mom was like, after I told it, my mom was like, okay, I won't use that word anymore, and she hasn't. And that was a learning moment for me too that was so powerful. It's like, okay, this is how I have to talk to you. And something I was saying in the workshop this morning, if you don't have those personal stories, challenge yourself to get more involved in your activism. Like if it's not personal for you yet, I think you can go a little deeper. I think you can get more stuck into community. A lot of us, our culture is capitalism is very isolating. Our culture is very isolated. A lot of people we're afraid of community on like a deep level. And a lot of people want to do activism they can do from their house alone. They want to sign a petition. They want to donate $5. And those can be really, I encourage people to do those things sometimes, and there's a lot of great good to that. But if you're doing anything in isolation, that is the weakest possible form of activism. Just two people working together is so much more powerful than one person working alone. So I think get into community, make it personal, and then you're able to communicate on a really personal level, and that breaks through propaganda like absolutely nothing else.
I think it's also important to recognize the patterns throughout history, right? After June 2020, and suddenly the corporate publisher that I worked for was like, we're gonna do anti-racism training. And so I remember going to this training and seeing a slide with a pyramid come up on my screen, and the anti-racist instructor talked about the levels of privilege, right? Where you fall racially in the United States. And he had two pyramids, and he was like, let's show an example of how this can change, how this is constantly shifting. And he was like, well, pre-9/11, Arabs were up here. And then after 9/11, Arabs dropped down the pyramid. And I remember this feeling of being like, oh, I was alive when that happened. I remember the visceral feeling of my family losing social equity. I remember when suddenly there was someone threw a brick through my uncle's business window, and someone accused my father of being in the Muslim Brotherhood, which is hilarious because we're Christian Palestinians. I remember this happening, and so all you have to do is look back throughout history, because right now they're targeting immigrants, they're targeting trans people, they're using Palestinian as an insult on a national stage. But not long ago, they were talking this way about the Irish, they were talking this way about the Italians. It makes you realize that they're actually using a playbook, and they're using a playbook of control. And I think once we start to see that, we can look at the ways in which people have been able to resist. And it's not, FYI, through assimilation and proximity to whiteness, because that only serves you for so long. Trust me, my family would know, within my lifetime, we lost social equity, and it had nothing to do with our skin color. I think these patterns are really important to recognize, and then we can look at the culture workers, we can look at the resistance movements that had success, we can look at the tool of violent resistance, which has contributed and been successful in almost every single revolution and resistance movement that's been successful throughout history. And I think we can learn from all of these and pull from them and play our part, wherever we're most skilled in that moment.
And I think, I think it's important to remember every explosion of energy around a social justice movement is setting the groundwork for the next one. Like the 2020 George Floyd protests, in many ways, set the stage and trained people who were then activated around Palestine in, late 2023 and 2024 because they could see the parallels, and I see Occupy, as part of a long tradition of student encampments and encampments throughout over a century of history, which led to the student encampment movement. And there are these explosions never last forever until one day they do, maybe, ideally. Sometimes they do. Sometimes you get a revolution. But it's everything. It's not a loss. The students' encampments all getting crushed. Everybody learned a lot from that. The state learned things. The people trying to roll out fascism learned things, but we all learned a lot of things. And everybody watching learned a lot of things. And those are things they can't take back, even with they can release all the AI videos they want. People can't unlearn what they learned from the student encampment protests, and it was a massive educational win.
Yeah, and in the book you talk about Rashid Khalidi talking about how knowledge is our greatest weapon. And so I just want to.
And he's one of the ones, he was telling students during the encampments, I know y'all want to see Palestine free in 2 months, but this is gonna be a long fight. Get stuck in.
Yeah. I think we had a question back there somewhere.
Hi. First of all, I want to say how much I admire the two of you. What you are doing is incredible. But my question for you is, how do you keep going? I mean, this whole situation seems like it's one step forward and 2 steps back. And we read the headlines, and they're killing babies, they're starving children, they're bombing hospitals, for God's sake. Who bombs a hospital? How do you do it? How do you keep your sanity? How are you able to keep doing the marvelous work that you're doing without losing it?
Thank you, Sue. I think about the privilege that I have. I am in communication with my loved ones in Gaza every single day, and I think if they can survive this, then I can absolutely keep fighting the way that I'm fighting.
Yeah, I want to thank you for your emotion. I'm always grateful when anyone can bring emotion to this. It gets harder and harder to access. Doing the work is how I stay sane. I don't know how people who can just watch this and ignore it, I don't think they are, sane is a problematic term. I don't think they're well. I don't think you're well. I can't imagine how horrible it must feel to watch all this and choose to do nothing. To choose to support it with your passivity, to choose to look away. That must feel so much worse than how it feels to know you're doing what everything you can think of. To know that to have been thanked by people in Gaza. I mean, I can die knowing I'm not religious, but I can die with a clear conscience. I can look myself in the mirror. I can go to sleep at night. And if I didn't keep doing things, then I won't be able to, because sometimes I go a few days and I'm I can't think of an idea for a video, or I'm going to take a week off social media, and sometimes I need to do that. Sometimes I need to rest and recuperate, but eventually it starts to feel really bad to be doing nothing. So yeah, I think I do it because that is how you keep a handle on your soul. And it can be quite beautiful to be standing with other people who inspire you and are courageous, like Hannah here. And, relationships will come from it. And the alternative is just so unbearably bleak. The alternative to just allow fascism to roll over you like a wave. Yeah. I would rather die than,
I think we also just came from a conference in Dearborn, and there was this incredible psychologist talking about how it might feel like we're failing and we're failing and we're failing. But we don't, the point of disrupting is not winning. Often, it's amazing when we win, and obviously that's the goal. But it is the fact that we are constantly disrupting. Because the second we allow these tenets of Zionism, we are contributing to the normalization, and suddenly there is blood on our hands. So I think for the moment, we just have to continue to disrupt, and that is how we stay sane.
Yeah.
Thank you, and God be with you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Any other questions? Okay, let's go over on this side, and we'll come to the front. So.
Thank you for that last comment. I feel like the reason we show up is partly because if we don't, I feel like I'm dying inside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That there's that slow, gradual soul death of the complicity. But I find myself use the BLM movement, especially during COVID. It was a really difficult time for me because that's when I began to see complex intersections of injustice. Sometimes they don't help each other. During BLM movement, and then pretty soon Fox News was putting out stuff around anti-AAPI violence stuff. And when I saw that, my heart sank because I knew that this was going to divide the Asian American communities. Some would say, we need more police, right? So I guess where I'm going with this is sometimes I see divisions where people at the top are collaborating, and POC communities, sometimes they fight for that little piece of pie. And I see some of that stuff happening in my community. Unless we name it, I don't know, we can't overcome those divisions, especially when it comes to solidarity movement. Have you identified some tricky solidarity situations?
Can I imagine how I feel about my community? The devil's bargain of cozying up to white supremacy and becoming like your oppressors. That is what Israel is. All of the evil that Jews have inflicted on Palestinians in the modern age, you can find echoes of it throughout centuries of our oppression in Europe. We were ghettoized in cities. We walled up community. We stole their land, and we were Europeans in Italy starting in the 15th century stole all the Jews' land and walled them up in tiny ghettos in cities where they were forced to pay rent to the very people who had stolen their land. There were massacres. There were massacre after massacre after massacre. You can find parallels for everything, and I mentioned some of those in the book. And so many Jews took this devil's bargain to thinking they could end that suffering by doing it unto others, by becoming the oppressors, by becoming the powerful. But now they're war criminals. Their whole society is Who wants that? I mean, they have the worst, like, rape statistics in the entire world. The sexual violence in Israel is unbelievable. All of their young people have to do genocide. That's what you get when you become the emperor, you know? This is a little woo-woo for some people, but, like, every great civil rights leader, every great radical thinker, you know, from MLK to Muhammad, talked about how the oppressor is oppressed by their own chains, you know? And you're going to find it in any marginalized community. That is like a force of history. Like, it's just if people are being oppressed, there will be some who try to escape that oppression by becoming like the oppressors, by cozying up to power, like being a capo in the concentration camps, becoming, you know, police for the Nazis. And so that, we have to be realistic about the fact that that force will always exist, that tendency will always be there. And as to how to fight it, I'm still working on that. Still working on that. You know, education, talking to people, convincing them that that's a bad idea. Storytelling.
Yeah, I'm a queer Palestinian, and I think one of the biggest successes that I've seen in terms of, like, trying to weaponize people's identities against each other is Israel's attempt at pinkwashing, which, you know, if you don't know, it's a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign by the state of Israel to convince the world that they're incredibly queer-friendly and therefore more civilized than their sort of savage neighbors, the Palestinians. And you'll hear this on a daily basis if you ever engage with this topic, that, like, oh, you know, if a queer person went to Gaza, they would be
thrown off a building.
Queers
for chicken. Or queers for Palestine is like chicken for KFC.
Yeah. Thank you. Can you tell we're gay people on the internet? And, you know, I've seen this happen over and over and over and over again, and I've seen it happen throughout my lifetime. And something that happened that was incredibly miraculous to me is that queer people in this country were like, oh, no. First of all, let's discount the fact that queer Palestinians exist, that queerness was like a colonial introduction, that homophobia was like a settler colonial introduction, and that the laws that are incredibly homophobic that exist in Palestine today were actually introduced by the British. So let's forget all of that, and let's say, hypothetically, that every single person in Gaza is a homophobe. Do they deserve genocide? And queer people in this country recognized oppression when they saw it, and they called bullshit. And that has been so incredible to see people say, I don't have to be like you to want you to still live, to deserve life, and to deserve liberation. And I think that that is something that we can really find hope in. And I think the way that it was done was logic, frankly, and storytelling. I think that there have been queer Palestinians who have been incredibly brave and put themselves at a lot of risk for their families, you know, who in their homelands, the IDF is weaponizing their queerness against their families, speaking out and saying that we do exist, and that you can't use this super racist narrative against us. And so, you know, that success, I think, to me shows that we can see these gateways, and I think people are getting that education. They're getting the education about galvanizing the people versus the elites in power, and hopefully that will continue to lead to more liberation.
And I think the internet too, because the internet has unleashed a lot of things, but it has made the world smaller. And the only way to combat this divide and conquer that ruling peoples have been using for thousands of years to, you know, consolidate power is we have to see everybody as valuable everywhere. Think globally, act locally, you know. We have to talk about and learn about Congo and Sudan and other genocides around the world. And we have to keep learning about people in different places. And we have to see this tactic of divide and conquer and get better and better and better at spotting it. And I think that's like my only hope for some sort of evolution of humanity. And we need to do it very soon because we all face the existential threat of climate change, and we need to get our shit together.
That's a different conference.
But it's so connected. It's so connected. Like that's the big genocide. The genocide of, I'm sorry, it's a looming genocide of billions of people. It's incredibly urgent, and these little genocides are an economic response to running up into planetary limits because capitalism has extracted just about everything it can extract. And so all that's left is the business of bombing people. It's an end state of capitalism. No, but I'm saying, I'm talking about global awareness and liberation and an evolution of humanity. Come on, we can do it. We can do it.
We have time for one more question, which was up here. I'm sorry, y'all. There will be time for mingling and a reception and all of that. I think I saw 4 hands, so.
Oh, okay. So I was raised when I was like 10 at Temple. They gave me a Friends of the IDF t-shirt. Currently, I'm not on speaking terms with my dad. This is probably more a question for Sim. Your specific experience with your mom. You went from not being on speaking terms and figuring out how to bridge what probably seemed like an insurmountable gap at a certain point. Were there specific videos or stories, or can you speak a little bit to how you were able to get past that and get back onto speaking terms that you're on now?
I don't know which ones it was. You know, she called me a terrorist and cut me off. And she's Christian. She's my dad, who's Jewish, is like, ugh, Israel, like, ugh. But I have family members. My cousins were much more religious than I was, and also even closer than my cousins, there was very close family friends who were Jewish, who lived near us, who we would do all our holidays with them. We would vacation together. I was a lot closer to them than a lot of my cousins. They called me a Nazi in October 2023 and have not reached back out. Like and it's very painful. It's very painful. I do have cousins, though, who are more religious. I have cousins who went on birthright trips and stuff, and they've been they just kind of didn't talk to me for a few years, and then they were like, "Hey, Sam, I liked your book." Like, okay, cool, you know. So I don't know which. I should ask her which videos it was, because I actually don't know. I should ask. I do think, like I said, from talking to her, I think the personal stories have helped. I have had a couple, I get emails from Jews saying, I gave your book to my dad or whatever, and it helped, but I think the most diehard Zionists are not going to read my book. And that's why I like Peter Beinart's book, even though I have issues with it, and I'm glad it exists, because I think it's like a good entryway, that being Jewish after the destruction of Gaza. I don't know all the circumstances of you and your dad. I don't know how deep he is in it. I don't know, like, if you would reach out, would he even be receptive, you know? But all you can do is tell your story. We can talk after too, but you know, we really can. But I think telling the personal story of why he may not so something that really helps me with my mom, I can tell you this, is a constant mantra when I'm talking to her. We live in different informational realities. This is my mantra. We live in different informational realities. And when she says something so outrageous and so out of pocket, instead of reacting, I force myself to breathe, and I say, tell me why you think that. I used to use that question a lot as a teacher, too. It's a really good question. Like when a kid would say something just like out of left field, and you're like, that's so wrong. Tell me why you're thinking that. What's your evidence for that? Where did you learn that? Where did you hear that? Well, what's their source? How do they know? Why do you think they might have said that? And so, like, I'll try to ask a lot of questions to try to figure out, okay, did she get this weird thing she just said from, like, an AI post on the internet, or was it Sean Hannity, or, like, where is this coming from? And then I try to find common ground, right? So what is something we agree on? You can reach back to, if he's religious, things in the Torah that you know he believes in. If it's more, you know his morals, his principles. Okay, you and I agree on this. Like, human life has value, and then can you build from there? And then telling your personal story of, like, why he doesn't know your informational reality. He hasn't seen any of the things that you've seen about Palestine. My grandpa was a card-carrying communist and died loving the state of Israel because he never heard about Palestinians in his life. He didn't know. My dad thinks he might have died not knowing the word. And he went to Israel and he loved it, and he went to the kibbutzes, and he totally bought the propaganda that this was a utopian socialist society. And with that generation, like, without social media, they just never heard the other story. So in your own words, telling you, like, these are the things I've seen, and this is how it's affected me. These are the protests I've gone to, and this is what happened. Hearing that I've gotten death threats from other Zionists and other Jews, that's, like, really powerful. That's like, hey, that's my kid, So I don't know if any of that's helpful, but it's very painful, and I'm very sorry. And we could talk more after if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you both for your heart and your time. I'm going to invite Addie and Sagan, if they are around, to come and conclude for us this evening with some announcements. Before that, while he gets up here, we will have Room of One's Own selling books, and we also have Read Palestine here, who will be doing a sort of donation fundraisers for books in classrooms. So make sure to stay after for that. Addie.
I have just one job, which is to say thank you. I've been scared at that cross, so don't look at that. But have you seen the picture behind it? I'm just going to claim it as an olive tree. Are we okay with that? Yes? So I think I'm so grateful that you have used stories and funky technology to connect us. And then I wanted to repeat this thing that you said, Hannah. We might have to take this fight analog. And so I'm thinking of us as a part of the root system. I'm on the steering committee of the Palestine Justice Network of the Presbyterian Church. You do not need to know about the Presbyterian Church, even though I did give them a history that they were very attentive to. But really what we want you to know is that there are some Christians who actually feel responsible for Christian Zionism, and we are working really hard to combat it. Let's clap for that, yes. Our network is about 20 years old. We are coming from all over the country, but you know that there's one church in Madison, this one, that is anti-Zionist and that cares about Palestine, and that I declare has an olive tree talking about a free Palestine in the very sanctuary. We Christians who represent the PJN feel like we are in a lineage of complicity and that we are making some roots of liberation. I'm trying to do that with that kid that was crying a lot before. We're trying to do it in relationship with each other. So thank you for hosting us, Madison. If you're interested in connecting with us, we're on Instagram, PJN_PCUSA. Someone in this room will tell you how to find that. And we are all connected, right? Are we going to take this fight analog? Yeah. Thank you for connecting us so that we could. Okay. Good night.
Thank you. Please join us outside. I would not be able to live with myself if I didn't tell you there's a resource sheet with free movies from your libraries, online articles, how to buy analog books. It's there, grab it, please. I don't want to take them home. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you, online friends.
Thank you, Dee.
Yes, of course.
Can we grab a
Oh, it's
photo
still hot.
before
It's still
we
hot,
go?
FYI.
Got it. Thank you. Don't say anything.
Shannon, would you be able to take a picture right now? Would you be able to take a picture? Yeah. I don't have my